Hey, thanks for tuning in to the Land and Home Show. Today we're talking all about the big updates here in the Central Kentucky real estate market. Hey, I'm Stephen J.B. Davis, your land specialist and residential realtor here in Central Kentucky and beyond. Today we are talking about the status of the market. So how does the market look right now, which will be very quick. And then we're going to talk a little bit about, actually a lot of it, about some changes going on in the residential market as far as getting under contract and what that looks like. So first and foremost, how's the market? Long story short, still a seller's market everywhere for land, for homes on acreage. Where residential real estate is concerned, you got your pre-COVID sort of seller's market happening here in the Lexington and immediate counties outside of it kind of area. And then anecdotally speaking, I am seeing more competition, more stiff competition for quality homes on acreage in those rural spaces. And that's kind of a new dynamic. Maybe it's just me. Unfortunately, there's no real way for me to empirically quantify or qualify this idea, but I've seen it firsthand a lot more than I have in the last 4 years. So if you're looking for a quality home and it happens to be rather far away from the immediate Lexington area, more people are feeling incentivized to move to those places, and they are competing pretty hard for that stuff. So that's the residential side. On the land side, like if you're buying land only, or maybe even purchasing a farm, things that are happening here are still a seller's market, first and foremost, but also you're seeing more quality land again, which makes me excited. For a long time, I feel like there's just poor quality land and it was not priced accordingly. Now you're getting a little bit of a price correction, still a seller's market, but you are seeing land that you really actually want to buy, or maybe if it's not as prime as you want, you're not looking at an arm and a leg type of cost for it. Also multiple offers happening on those most highly desired acreage classes. So, 10 acres, 20 acres, 30 acres, even starting to stretch into the 40 acre area of things. There is more competition, so more multiple offers. So yeah, that's pretty wild. And then last but not least, the trifecta is selling fast. What is the trifecta? It's my own little term for a piece of land that has moving water, has woods, and has cleared property that is relatively flat, that doesn't require a bunch of terraforming in order to make it buildable for whatever reason or be able to grow stuff. So woods, pasture, and moving water. To me, that is what I call the trifecta, and that is what you'll pay a premium for, and that is the land that is moving the way that houses do. I'm talking 30 acres and less kind of stuff, and then leaving the market in a matter of 24 hours or maybe a week. Whereas a lot of land historically, even if it's really, really desirable land, is on the market for a lot longer than a week. But when it is quality, it's leaving faster than I've ever seen it. There's just a premium on quality, really, even though there's more of it coming on the market. No one wants to just buy a mountainside or a hillside. People have these plans to do things with their land. They would prefer to be able to do multiple things, not just one thing, or not have to spend a whole lot of money to get to that end game, meaning you've bought the land, but now you've got to do all of this stuff to the land in order to be able to use it the way you want to, through the dollars that you spend. So that is the market update from a health of the market. What's the dynamic of the market situation? And the conclusion of all that is, if you're buying, you still need to come correct. You need to be prepared. You need to know what you want. You need to be pre-approved. You need to have your proof of funds. You need to you need to be prepared. It is getting to be very competitive, literally on all fronts of buying, or I should say both fronts, as far as I'm concerned. I don't know what industrial or commercial land's doing, but as far as residential properties are concerned and land is concerned, it's becoming a stiffer and stiffer competition ring for buyers and sellers. I think the lesson has been learned. We're out of COVID, so this idea of I'm just going to throw a crazy number out there and see what happens. In 2023, as I'm sitting here, what will happen is that your property will sit, and if it doesn't sit, it means that somebody's probably talked some sense into you for you to accept a much lower price than the one that you were just dreaming would happen, because it might have happened 2 years ago, or you've already lowered the price and corrected it. So I don't see the crazy prices out there. It seems like sellers are hip to what's going on, or at least are working with realtors that are helping them understand what's going on and what's possible. But yeah, buyers, the interest rates are high, higher. I shouldn't say they're high. High is 18% if we're going to be accurate about it. But interest rates are not as great as they were 2 years ago or 3 years ago, and you have really, really tough competition. So take that as you will. If we move on, we're just going to be focusing on the residential side of things for now. The Bluegrass Association of Realtors, which is mainly a central Kentucky thing. I mean, it stretches a little east, a little west, but it goes from almost into northern Kentucky all the way down to the Tennessee border, actually. So it's this big chunk. So that means that pertains to a lot of real estate. And for years, the Bluegrass Association of Realtors, on the administrative side, on the legal side, they have been working on changing our purchase contract, which used to just be called an offer to purchase. There's a lot of terminology change because we're trying to standardize things here. We're a little bit behind the 8 ball compared to other states where real estate is concerned, but we're changing that. And along with those changes, there are things that have been added to our new purchase contract to, I think, ultimately change the culture of buying and selling here, and to make it clear what everyone's role is. Everyone's got a role. I have a role. You as a buyer, as a seller, have a role. Your realtor has a role. Everyone has a role. And historically, or at least for the last 30-ish years, I think it's maybe been a little less than that, the contract that we've used has been, a step or two above a handshake. There was a lot of gray in it. It was, I would say, pretty biased toward the buyer. There were not a lot of repercussions for buyer or seller if someone were in breach of that contract. And so this new contract changes all of that. I think it forces buyers and sellers to really consider what it is they want and how serious they are before they put their name on something. And it backs that up with very real, written out consequences. I wasn't a huge fan of the new contract at first, because it's a lot longer. It's 11 pages now instead of the 4 that we had. But after being trained on it, and after spending some time with it privately, and really just like reading through it and highlighting things and asking additional questions, I'm really, really happy with it, because there gets to be a lot of confusion about roles, about time. And so without further ado, I'm going to just get into the highlights, general highlights, then buyer highlights, things that are new. These are all new things. So general highlights that are new, buyer highlights that are new, seller highlights that are new as a result of this contract. So the first thing is that this contract really pushes you to get an attorney. When you start to get into interpreting contractual language or asking about hypothetical situations, well, what would happen if, you're really starting to get into interpreting the law, or even when you're wanting to modify aspects of the contract and wanting to know, well, is that really airtight? Is it as good as I'm intending it to be when I present it to the other party? You're starting to talk about law. And guess who's not a lawyer? Me. And most realtors. Most realtors do not have law degrees. And I've operated this way for years, where I say to my clients, beyond the sentence that says you cannot fill in the blank, or you are permitted to fill in the blank, if it's not clear enough to you from there, then you need to consult an attorney. It's too big of a decision for you to not treat it with big seriousness and consult bigger brains where certain purviews are concerned. And where legal interpretation is concerned, that's a bigger brain than me. It's above my pay grade. And so I don't do that to pass the buck. I do it because it's your money that you're spending, or it's your investment that you're getting rid of by selling it. And so why do you want to leave it to someone who's not trained in legal matters from a broader perspective? I'm trained on a document, right? But when you start talking about variables outside of this document and how it affects this or how it affects that, you're really talking about the law. And that goes for everything. I mean, when you get into real estate, you should be consulting your CPA. You should be consulting your finance guy or gal. You should be consulting a lawyer. In Illinois, you have a realtor and a lawyer. That's just the law there. You have both. They work together in order to make things with a contract happen. That's just standard. We don't have that here, but this big highlight here is to consult an attorney should you have questions about these things that are in this contract that are not explicitly clear to you. The second big highlight is that everything has a timeline, and time is of the essence. In our last contract, there are a few mentions of specific days, but again, that's where a lot of this gray came in. And so a lot of things were happening fly by night. There was not a lot of transparency and things like that. And so everything is time of the essence, meaning if something says you have 3 days, on that fourth day, you are in breach, buyer or seller, whatever the task is that you were supposed to do according to this contract that you signed. Time is of the essence on everything. The exception to that third highlight would be the closing date. The closing date is allowed to be extended once without anybody having to sign anything. Like, it can be extended for a week automatically. Like, maybe there's a title issue, or maybe the house suddenly floods and a repair needs to take place. Like, that's sort of built in. So the closing date is the only exception to this whole time is of the essence. Like, you will put in a closing date, but it's malleable. It's changeable. All right, moving on. The fourth highlight, the one that I love, is when you are in breach, there's a really, really large section of telling you what's going to happen. Are you going to owe somebody escrow money? Are you going to owe me part of my commission because you decided today that you just didn't want it? Who can take you to mediation, how that happens, whose damages you have to pay, all of that stuff outlined. There's no more question. I bring it up when I feel like clients are teetering on getting themselves into some sort of legal conflict, not to scare, but again, to put everything on the table so that they're aware. But now it's just in the contract. I don't have to be the scary person. This thing that you're signing is the thing that's dictating what happens when you're in breach or when a seller's in breach. And then the fifth highlight is that there's now a section for rejecting an offer, which I love, because sometimes clients, or rather listing agents, they may have 16 multiple offers, right? And to call every single person versus sending over an electronic signature request to their seller to just say, like, sign here to reject the offer, and I can send them all out at once to all the realtors. Like, that is super, super helpful to know that, like, all right, this deal, like, this is officially dead. On paper, it's not happening. We're not waiting for a call. We're not like, well, the deadline still hasn't passed for you to accept. Like, it's just clean and clear. And so those are the general highlights. As a buyer, there's 5 main highlights. Escrow money now has a deadline. It needs to be received. I mean, there's always been a deadline, according to Kentucky law, but it's never been written into our contract. So now it needs to be delivered within 3 days. And if there's going to be some aspect of that that's complicated, then that needs to be talked out and, you know, an exception made. But that's on the front end, not, oh, I just haven't gotten around to sending the check. Oh, I forgot to send the electronic payment. Like it needs to happen. Otherwise, as a buyer, you're going to be in trouble. And the kind of trouble is the kind of trouble that costs you more money, okay? The second highlight is if there's a financial application deadline. So if you are applying for a loan to purchase whatever the home is, or multiplex or duplex or whatever, you now have a deadline to put in that application. And that is not entirely new, but what is the teeth behind that is a seller via their listing agent now has the right to know the exact status of that application as it goes along. They don't need to know your net worth or how much money you have in the bank or whatever, but if you're going to be difficult about it, they now have the right to go call your lender and say, hey, has so-and-so applied for their loan for this property? Has the appraisal been ordered? Has this happened as it pertains to obtaining this loan? They have the right to know that. So more transparency there. And the reason why is because people would be playing a whole lot of hanky-panky behind the scenes as buyers, where they're still shopping around after they're under contract, but they're dragging their feet to do it. They have told their lender to wait on this one thing so that something else can happen, or they've just decided to do everything out of order, necessitating several extensions of, or at least necessitating requests for extensions in a contract because they haven't done their part. So for these first two, this is really to help buyers to not drag their feet. And if you do drag your feet, again, back to those general highlights, you're not going to be in trouble from I'm going to come and spank you, but you're going to owe somebody some money. Time is of the essence. No more dragging your feet, no more cloak and dagger, no more hiding in corners around your financing. So it really means to have your stuff figured out before you enter into contract. Talk to your financial advisor, talk to your CPA, have your taxes ready, because now there are deadlines. And when you start to break those deadlines, you're costing yourself more money. That's not a me problem, it's not a me thing, it's a you thing. I can't turn in your W-2s, your realtor can't do that for you. I can't figure out what your credit limit is going to be to borrow. That's for your lender to figure out before you enter into contract. All right, so then the third thing is inspection. Inspection's a big one. We used to have this thing where you had a time period to get through the inspection process, like to actually get the property inspected in whatever ways you required. Then you had a time period for negotiating what repairs would be done or not. And then you had a time period for, if you couldn't agree, for a seller to really think about, well, do they want to sign the release that you just sent them since you can't agree? Or now that they've been served this release, do they actually just want to agree to what you asked for in the first place? Instead of all of that, there is one inspection period for all inspections and for all of that stuff to be figured out. So say your inspection period is 2 weeks. So in that 2 weeks, anybody that needs to go in that house and check things out that you need to know in order to make sure you're comfortable buying the place, it needs to happen within that 2 weeks. The negotiation for repairs and remediation of anything needs to happen within that 2 weeks. And you need to decide, there's no deciding after the 2 weeks, you need to decide within that 2 weeks if you're going to have the house or if you're not going to have the house. There's no more, I'm buying as is, but I want an inspection, or it's just, you're getting the house or you're not, and your inspection period is your time to do that. It is irrespective, or said differently, it is separate from if the house appraises or not. That's a totally separate contingency that you don't have control over. If it doesn't appraise, then, or if the appraisal is short, there's other stuff for that. But as far as the inspection is concerned, do you really like the house? Did you secretly find something that's better? You got your inspection period to figure all that out. Once you're outside of that and you want to leave the contract, guess what? Going to cost you money. Unless it's a title issue or a true financing issue. Next thing, fourth thing for buyer highlights, is the condition that the property is left in by the time you close. Broom clean condition. If you want somebody to come in there and you want a cleaning service, you need to make that a contingency. Otherwise, it's going to be swept. No one's filling holes for pictures that were hanging on the walls. No one's painting. Like, it's going to be in broom clean condition unless parties have agreed to something, to a standard higher than that. And in addition to that, there's now a space on the contract that I love for all of the crap that the seller needs to take. I've been in some hairy situations on closing day where a seller has left furniture that they didn't want, and it was in no way a part of the deal, and it was in not good condition. The buyers don't want to close. They don't really want to deal with disposing of it, but clearly needed it the seller. So if there are situations like that, that the buyer wants to make sure these things are gone, they can write in there and flip-flop. If the seller wants to make sure that they are taking the ceiling fan that their grandmother gave them or the chandelier that their dad bought for their wedding anniversary, they can write it in that space. Nice, clear, simple, clean. Last thing is reasonable diligence. I love this one because whether it's intentional or not, buyers leave out a lot of things that matter to them. As a realtor, we know about the known unknowns. A known unknown is something like, what's the seller going to accept for the property? Like what price will they accept? Well, we don't know, right? I can give you a fair market value, you put a number on it, and then we don't know until we either reach a deal or they accept someone else's or they counter or whatever. That's a known unknown. It's a known question mark. There are lots of unknown unknowns, right? Here's a wild one. There may be a nest of snakes in the crawl space. It is not going to be common practice for me to write language into a contract around a nest of snakes. It's an unknown unknown. It's not a very common thing. It's not something that you regularly ask about. If we come off of the extremism for a second and move to a different type of unknown unknown, where maybe it matters to you how quiet a neighborhood is, but you've never brought it up. We've decided to look at a house that you love right next to the airport, and you, 3 weeks into it, we're out of your inspection period, you're like, I didn't realize that there'd be so much air traffic. Sounds silly, but things like this happen all the time. That's an unknown unknown for me. I could not have anticipated that would matter to you unless you said it. We all saw that we were next to the airport. We all saw where the house was, right? It's out in open sight. It's reasonably findable or discoverable that it might be kind of loud around there because there are planes landing and taking off. And so that's just an example, but for reasonable things that are easy to figure out, easy to know, frankly, easy to look up, that maybe you haven't mentioned to me matter, but you haven't taken it upon yourself to figure out either, that's not going to be something that a seller is going to be accountable for. You're going to be assumed to be informed on those types of matters. So look it up. That's really what it comes down to. If it matters to you, you haven't said anything about it, and you certainly haven't put it in writing, take it upon yourself to spend as much time as you do comparing prices on Amazon to actually go through the process to figure out those other unknowns, those other thresholds that you may have before you go into pursuing a contract with someone and being legally bound to them. Otherwise, there's really no remedy for something that you didn't take upon yourself to figure out or say mattered before the fact. On the seller highlights, we have a couple of things. Warranties that are attached to, repair guarantees or to HVACs or to manufacturer's warranties. Those used to be kind of like, the seller's being nice that they've provided all of that. Now it is an obligation. As a seller, if there are things in that house that have warranties or certain sorts of guarantees for service contracts, it is your responsibility, your obligation contractually to make sure those things carry over, to either give that information over to the buyer's agent so that they know how to transfer those things, to transfer those things yourself if that particular company requires your authorization to transfer them, but you have a hand in making sure those warranties are transferred to the person or people buying your home. In addition to that, this is kind of related, HOA documents and fees. Fees is easy. If there are special assessments or money that you owe your HOA, you need to pay it before closing or at closing. It's not going to be a buyer's issue. That's just written into the contract. You're responsible for those costs. Where documents are concerned, it is now your responsibility to either provide those documents or provide a written authorization. We have a whole new fancy form for it, but as a seller, to provide written authorization that's basically saying like, hey, so-and-so, this buyer is going to be asking for our HOA documents because we're under contract for our house. I am a member of this HOA because I own this house at this address, and I'm authorizing that they have reason to be asking for this. Because a lot of times what's happened in the past is HOA, they're not always super forthcoming with documents. Either they cost an arm and a leg, or they say, you don't even live here, why would we send any of this information to you? So as a seller, it is now your responsibility, with the timeline, might I add, to aid in the buyer being able to get those documents. And there's a whole host of reasons why. Sometimes it's the lender that needs them. Sometimes it's the buyer that wants to make sure from a due diligence standpoint that they can use their property the way that they'd like to, or build a shed or whatever. So it's your responsibility to now help get those things to happen. And then last but not least, with inspection, repairs that you've agreed to do need to happen no later than 48 hours before closing. That one's plain and simple. And the other one is stay out of the way. We do live in a world now where a lot of people work from home, more so than they used to 3 years ago, but you don't need to be on top of an inspector. You don't need to be interrupting or even really there for the walkthrough, because here's the thing, you're opening yourself up to liability for hearing things that if the deal falls through, now you have to disclose later when you have to put your home back on the market. So just stay out of the way. Yeah, it's your house, we get it, but you really don't want to interfere with how long it's going to take. You don't want to interfere with what you know and what you don't know, and what you might be responsible for disclosing later if the deal falls through. In conclusion, real estate transactions are a collaboration. They're a team effort. And when you work on a team, if you're at all familiar with any kind of sport, any team sport means that there are roles. You've got defensive players, you've got offensive players, you've got transitional players. If it's soccer, they're called midfielders, and lacrosse, mids, whatever. But everyone has a role. And if you are engaging and pursuing real estate in a serious of a way where you're about to put your name on a legal obligation, but your expectation is to sit on the sideline or to be the coach, even though you're not really in the practice of playing the game that much, what you're going to do is spoil a lot of things for yourself that may end up in costing you more money, or just not having the house that you want, or selling the house that you want to sell. So, respect the role. It may not feel good to have to answer to people, but when you're borrowing money, you have to. When you're not in the regular practice of buying a house every week, you have to. And if you're not a lawyer who's regularly practicing contractual law, you have to. There are too many people involved in making the deal happen that do it every day to get you to the closing table for you to either sit on the sideline or to decide that you're going to decide the process of how everything gets done. You're going to decide yourself right into a disaster is what will happen. So those are the updates. I think this will make a lot of buyers and a lot of sellers more serious before they engage, which I love. The one thing that we all have in common is time. Some people have more money than others. Some people have less. But time really is a equalizing factor. It's something that none of us can get back. And so in interest of not wasting it, you've got to come correct. You've got to know your role. And I think that this new change too, there may be an uptick in homes that go back on the market, because some people, it doesn't matter how many times you tell them that the stove is hot, they insist that they need to touch the stove. So there may be a lot of people in breach of contract coming up here soon with these changes. You may also see that homes might be on the market longer. I don't know, but I could imagine that might be something that happens, because now that people have consequence for being lackadaisical, or for essentially deciding that they're going to do it their way, they may think twice before they just start putting in offers, which happens so much more than you think. So with that, I'm finished. I'm sorry that it's taken me so long to do a market update. Getting back from international travel it takes a toll, and I'm in the middle of spring cleaning, which is why things look a mess here. So I've just been busy. I've been working really, really long days, both for my profession and also preparing for summer here with tree work and landscaping and all sorts of things. So things should be just about back on track, and expect to hear from me in another week with more videos. And I will see you all later. Thanks for watching. Put your comments and questions below, or get in touch with me. Peace.